Alright, so making a copy of a pickguard. For this template I'm using 1/4 inch MDF. Double stick tape. Cut it out, stick it down. Stick it back down on the template material. Bring it over to the bandsaw. Set your height adjustment and cut it out. Stop it. Cut it out. Stop it. And that's close enough. You can trace the pickguard out and then just cut the template separately and then stick the pickguard on, but this is just the way I've been doing it, and I find it's slightly faster. Now I take it over to the router table. Here's a 1/2 inch guide bearing router bit. The key is to adjust the height here. So we want that bearing to ride along the pickguard, and that's going to trace the design. The edges of the pickguard are beveled, which can make this a little tricky, so just be really careful. Don't set the bit too high, or the cutter is going to gouge the pickguard out. This one has some particularly tight corners, and I use a 3/16 guide bearing bit for that. This bit will be able to trace these tight corners a lot more accurately. I would never use 3/16 before using a 1/4 inch first. You just want to reduce the workload on the weaker, smaller bits. Put a backing down and use a 3/8 inch Forstner bit to drill the holes to get it started. So after it's partially drilled out, I'm going to move to a 3/8 inch guide bearing bit on the router table. And then switch back to a 1/4 inch guide bearing bit to clean it out and get all the tighter corners. Put a backing down and use an 1/8 inch bit on a drill press to transfer all the holes from the pickguard. Once in a while you'll make a mistake. You can just use super glue and accelerator to fill it and retrace it with a guide bearing bit. So now we have the spot we glued trimmed down with a guide bearing bit. It's good as new for the purposes of a template. And just to knock the fuzz off the edges, we're going to flip it over so the bearing rides along the smooth top, and it'll knock all that fuzz off the edge of the template. Scrape the edges with a single edge blade to knock off any of the residual fuzz. MDF is a little soft and can compress sometimes under the pressure of the guide bearing. So I like to run thin super glue along every edge that the bearing is going to contact, just to harden it up and make sure it won't compress. Once the super glue hardens, I like taking a piece of 220 and just finish sanding around the whole pickguard. And I'll run my finger along and see if I can feel any inconsistencies at all. Because when you put the bevel on a finished pickguard, it's going to stick out like a sore thumb if you have any little inconsistencies. So really focus on getting this as smooth as possible. And don't just think because you traced it on the router table it's going to be perfect. You always have to check this by hand and eye. And remember, any dips or valleys in the pickguard template can be filled very easily with super glue and accelerator, and then sanded to size. And it helps to use a foam or rubber backing block while you're sanding to keep everything even. Once you're happy with the shape, take it over to your pickguard blank. Now in this case, we want this side, shiny side up, because it's a standard right-handed guitar. Flip that over to the matte side, and since we want the shiny side facing up like this, we're going to flip it over that way. Okay, there it is with the tape. Now we flip it over and stick it down. Back to the bandsaw, and you know the routine by now. I'm going to start with a pickup route. So I drilled out the pickup route with a Forstner bit, and also just chipped away a little with a hammer and a chisel to make clearance for this bit. It's a pretty tight cavity here, and you do not want this to kick back when you turn the router table on. The bit will kind of flare out a little bit, and if you don't have some clearance here, you'll turn it on and it'll just possibly take a huge chunk out of the pickguard. It'll scare the shit out of you, and it's really not good. So don't do that. Now for the bevel. For this, I use a 30-degree bit. It's just my personal preference. First, I start beveling about half, and then I do the other half. Because what I found is if you try to bevel the whole thing at once, sometimes the bit can grab the pickguard and take a tear out of it, which is not what you want. So better safe than sorry. Takes you another couple of minutes. But by splitting the workload in half, I think it makes it a little less likely to tear out, and it'll make your life easier. Okay, the pickguard's cut out, got it beveled. Now we have to drill for the holes. So line it up on some kind of backing and get your 1/8 inch drill bit on your drill press. Okay, and once the holes are all drilled, I just like doing a roll call. Okay, so what I mean by that is 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 holes. We flip it over and make sure there are 10 here. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. Good, that's $40 less that I'm getting paid for this job, so go fuck yourselves. Okay, and now for the big finish, I have this single flute countersink that is the best I've found so far for countersinking plastic. This thing is awesome. So what I do is just set the depth stop to where the screw looks good in the countersink and do them all the same way. There it is, completed pickguard. I didn't peel the plastic off, but that's the whole process. And that's for the easy version of just making a pretty straight copy of something. It gets a lot more complicated when you've got different necks, different pickups, and all that kind of stuff.